Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We now turn to Song of the Redwood-Tree. Now this is guys, can I say this out loud to start with? This is a hard poem for me to talk about. There are a number of poems in Leaves of Grass that I have to admit that they're difficult for me. I'm ambivalent about them, as many readers are, and this is one of those. By the way, notice it's going to be Song of the Redwood Tree, because we're actually going to have a tree talking, and this tree is going to be talking about the fact that it is being felled. That is to say, there will be a certain kind of environmental reading of this poem that will be deeply disturbing. But as we've said from the very beginning in our conversations, we're going to address all of the different facets of Leaves of Grass, and this is going to be a tough one for us, but we're going to go ahead. We'll get through it. Now, ironically, this is one of the poems that Whitman really liked, because he made $100 from the writing of this. And while we've said before in earlier lectures, he didn't make a lot of money from his poetic enterprise, so he's pretty jazzed about this. It is a poem of 3 parts. We're going to go ahead and do it all in just one lecture, however, together, because really it's a poem with 2 kind of addendum parts to it, and many have seen the 2 parts added on as being kind of weak, almost like apologetic of some of the things that he has said about, hurrah, let's cut down trees to build an empire. We'll get to it. Now, the assumptions here are that you've been with us at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, in our playlist. Everything from inscriptions, we're going to mention several of those poems in the early inscriptions, up and including Song of the Exposition, which we just finished. Now, it will make sense that these poems all kind of come together. We're going to see some similar themes, if you will, here. Celebrations, and we've got these 12 kind of, this group of 12 songs, and we're getting now to the end of those songs. One of the things I want to point out before we turn to our Nortons for background information is to keep in mind the influence of Plato and the dialogues on his poetic approach. Here we're going to see a kind of dialogue, if not a dialogue, certainly a chant of a kind, and we'll play that game. Now, Nortons will tell it to us this way. Walt Whitman composed the poem in the fall of 1873, asking and receiving $100 for it from Harper's Magazine, which printed it in its issue of February 1874. It next appeared among the Centennial Songs of the 1876 2 Rivulets, and then in Leaves of Grass 1881, remaining unchanged in title and also except for 1 or 2 words in text. Among the manuscript drafts is Walt Whitman's own note to himself on the theme of this poem. Quote, "The spinal idea of the poem, I, the tree, have filled my time and filled it grandly. All is prepared for you. My termination comes prophecy, a great race, great as the mountains and the trees, intersperse with italic, first person speaking, the same as in Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking, a poem that we will get to later." To Rudolf Schmidt, Whitman wrote, 4th of March, 1874, that he had written the poem, quote, "to idealize our great Pacific half of America, the future better half," end quote. And so as we turn now to the poem itself, "A California Song" will be the opening line. We're going to want to pay attention to a certain kind of irony. There are several ironies of this poem. One is that Whitman loved California but never actually got there. Of course, as we have said, the furthest west he ever got was Denver, and he had hoped to get to California and he never did. There is a good number of us who are readers of this poem who believe that if Whitman could have actually seen 200 plus feet trees being taken down and the deforestation of certain areas of Northern California, if he could have witnessed it, he might have written a different kind of poem. But he didn't, and so here we're going to have a certain kind of celebration of something probably he maybe never saw. Let's go ahead and go to it. We'll begin with passage number 1. He will begin with "A California Song." Now, there are 10 mentions of California in the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass, up to and now this one making the 11th. A prophecy and indirection, you'll remember from when I read the book, he played that same idea of indirection. A thought impalpable, that is to say, beyond language, beyond words, to breathe as air. Now, this impalpable word will take us back, of course, to Song of Myself, passage 4, bends an arm on an impalpable rest. There's something that is transcendent for Whitman. And we're going to come back to this idea of fresh air and all of that. A chorus of dryads, only time dryads gets used in All Leaves of Grass will be in this poem 3 times. Chorus of dryads, fading, departing, or hemidryads, departing. Now this hemidryads is significant because of course that we're talking now the ancient Greek myth of every tree having a spirit, a nymph, and when you fell the tree, when you kill the tree, the nymph died. Which is of course why, you know, those of us who love trees love to, you know, imagine that with every death of every tree there's the death of a spirit. Here, later he'll even call it consciousness. A murmuring, I think that's an interesting word. A murmuring fateful, I think that's an interesting word. Giant voice out of the earth and sky, voice of a mighty dying tree in the redwood forest dense. We're going to come back to the word dense because he had heard through any number of reports the density of these forests. Now for those of us that have spent a lot of time out in these woods, we will tell you that dense doesn't even begin to capture what is so unbelievably majestic about these forests out there in that area of Northern California. Now we're going to get the first of 3, and they're in italics. You can see them, mark them in your own anthology, in your own Leaves of Grass. There's 3 italicized voices speaking now, 3 different subsets or spoken language of the tree. The tree's going to speak. Now, of course, we're playing with symbolism here, and you know this by the time you've gotten to this point of the reading of Leaves of Grass. Whitman is playing games here. Obviously, huge trees are going to be a symbol. A symbol of what? Well, a number of things. But here, notice, first of all, the voice, and it's going to be farewell. Why? Because the redwood tree is about to be cut down, okay? Farewell, my brethren, and obviously we can point out that one of the things not spoken of in this poem are all the indigenous peoples that live in these forests, that are a part of these forests, that are somehow, if not completely ignored, for sure marginalized in this poem. We've got to say that out loud as well, which is why, again, we can be very ambivalent about this poem, okay? Farewell, my brethren, obviously one tree speaking to all the other trees. Farewell, O earth and sky, farewell, ye neighboring waters. My time has ended, my term has come. It takes us back to Song Myself, passage 52. You know, you can look for me under my boots if you're looking for me. And then that's the very first. So it's almost like an introductory kind of set of lines. And then we come back to Whitman now. Along the northern coast, just back, by the way, that's a really American kind of term, just back from the rock-bound shore and the caves. I've told you from reading Dry Salvages of T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets. I think you have to read Whitman to be able to read T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets. After you've read a poem like this, you can go back and study again our stuff that we've said about 4 quartets, and especially Dry Salvages. In the Salin air, from the sea, in the Mendocino country, that, of course, area around San Francisco, right? With the surge for bass and accompaniment low and hoarse, with crackling blows of axes sounding musically driven by strong arms. It's going to make us think about Song of the Broad Axe, obviously. Riven deep by the sharp tongues of the axes, there in the redwood forest dance, I heard the mighty tree, its death chant chanting. By the way, death chant is only used one time in All Leaves of Grass, hyphenated this way, and it's here. The choppers heard not. The camp shanties echoed not. By the way, shanties here are both huts as well as obviously the work songs. Heard not. The echoed-eared teamsters and chain and jackscrewmen heard not. In other words, the people taking these trees down didn't hear this song, he says, that I'm going to hear. As the wood spirits, we're back up to the nymphs idea, right, came from their haunts 1,000 years to join the refrain. And 1,000 years is, of course, it's a deeply unsettling recognition of how old these trees actually are. But in my soul, I plainly heard. Now, some of us will read this going, oh, okay, we're going to get a certain kind of tragic voice that will be represented by this tree that is falling. Yeah, not so much. Murmuring, notice the second use, out of its myriad leaves. I told you guys about the way he loves to use the word leaves, leaves of grass, obviously. Down from its lofty top, rising 200 feet high to give a sense of just the majestic nature of these trees. Out of its stalwart trunk and limbs, out of its foot-thick bark, notice the repetition of the word out. That chant of the seasons and time, chant not of the past only, but of the future. And obviously the tree then is going to symbolize everything from the past as well as the future. And as we've already said, Whitman said it, you'll remember, in Song of the Open Road. Why is it that sometimes when you walk under a tree, you just forever change? And obviously we're kind of changing a little bit of his line, but the point being, trees are magnificent for Whitman, as they obviously are for us in 303. I mean, we've got Ruthie's tree that sits right outside our window to remind us of the majesty of trees. And now to the second statement, right? And each one of these, by the way, just seems to get a little bit longer. You untold life of me, and all you venerable and innocent joys. 5 times now we're going to get the word joys. Perennial hardy life of me with joys, mid-rain and many a summer sun, and the white snows and night, and the wild winds. We think of Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, don't we? Oh, the great, patient, rugged joys, my soul's strong joys, unwrecked by man. It's a disturbing line on so many levels. And then the parenthetic, for no, I bear the soul befitting me. I too have consciousness, identity, and all the rocks and mountains have, and all the earth. And parenthetic, it's a compelling line. Of course, many have argued that in some ways it is a poem like this, along with obviously Thoreau's Walden and John Muir's classic writings, that the environmentalist movement is actually going to find its deepest roots, if we could use that word picture. Joys, back to that word again, of the life befitting me and brothers mine, our time, our term has come. So in other words, we've served our purpose. Now we are to be cut down, to be used to build a new empire. We're going to get to that idea in a second. Not yield we mournfully. And then all of a sudden we say, oh, this is going to be one of these, many people have called it blind optimism. I've called it informed optimism most of the time, although at times this can seem, a poem like this can make it seem like Whitman's got a certain kind of blind optimism of what's going on with possible deforestation. Nor yield we mournfully, majestic brothers, we who have grandly, we're going to get back to the word, filled our time with nature's, notice he keeps capitalizing it, borrowing from Emerson, nature's calm content with tacit huge delight, we're back to Joyce. We welcome what we wrought for through the past and leave the field for them. The idea of obviously evolution, we use Ken Wilber's idea of transcendent include. For them predicted long, and the them, I mean, what is the them? Obviously, but the humans that are going to, and more particularly the Americans that are going to be taking these trees down. For a superber race, we've seen this in Song of the Exposition, in a number of other places in Whitman's patriotism. They too grandly fill their time. For them, we abdicate. In other words, we're welcoming what's happening. In them ourselves, ye forest kings. In them these skies and airs, these mountain peaks, Shasta, Nevadas, we're obviously naming mountain ranges, right? Shasta in California and the Nevadas in Eastern California. These huge precipitous cliffs, this amplitude, these valleys, far Yosemite, to be in them absorbed and assimilated. So again, this transcendent include idea. And then that's the end of the second brief exchange, the almost like dramatic monologue of the tree. Now we're back to Whitman. Then to a loftier strain, still prouder, more ecstatic, rose the chant. So it's like one tree starts talking, and now all the trees start talking. Now, of course, for those of you who are Tolkien fans, you all know about the power of trees that can talk, right? And Treebeard and the whole bed. Still prouder and more ecstatic, rose the chant, as if the heirs, the deities of the West, I think it's significant he uses the word deities, joining with Master Tongue bore part. Now, this is the last, this is choral, and what are we going to hear? Well, we're going to hear a celebration of a race of humans, Americans, who are in many ways the culmination of civilization. You could make the argument this is one of the most patriotic of the poems that Whitman will write, celebrating what it is that is necessary for America to become the new empire. And what is it that this new chorus says? Not wand from Asia's fetishes, not red from Europe's old dynastic slaughterhouse, and then in parentheses to make us think, of course, of everything from Virgil's Aeneid on. Area of murder, plots of thrones, with scent left yet of wars and scaffolds everywhere. We think obviously of Napoleon. But come from nature's, notice it's capitalized, long and harmless throes, peacefully builded fence, these virgin lands, lands of the western shore, notice the capitalization of western, to the new culminating man, to you the empire knew. And now for 10 or 11 or even 12, if you're going to count your U's, the trees now will address humans. It's almost as if Whitman wants to write a poem where the trees will say to those taking the trees down, and of course living off their profit and obviously everything that the trees will provide in the way of shelter or whatever, building the new empire, he calls it here. The empire knew. It's almost as if Whitman wants our conscience to be a little bit somehow comforted through this chorus of the trees. Let's hear the trees talk with, again, these you. Notice the repetition, obviously speaking to American. He'll actually use the very word America here in a bit. You promised long, we pledge, we dedicate. Sounding very much like the ending of the Declaration of Independence. You occult deep volitions. You'll remember the word occult gets used in starting from Pomonic passage 11. You average spiritual manhood, average here meaning collective, right? Purpose of all, poised on yourself. Think about Emerson's self-reliance. Giving, not taking, law. Again, go back to Aeneas 6, when Anchises will promise Aeneas, this is what's going to make Rome so great. Obviously, the early American thinkers thought the same. Law is what's foundational to the building of the American civilization. You womanhood divine, two or three times in this poem, we're going to get that juxtaposition of male, female. You womanhood divine, mistress and source of all, whence life and love and aught that comes from life and love. You unseen moral essence of all the vast materials of America. And there it is. Age upon age, working in death the same as life. Now this idea of working in death is Whitman's theodicy. We've said it. That is to say, of our big five, the last one is theodicy. Why do bad things have to happen? Why must all of the beautiful, majestic trees be cut down? Well, here it is. In death, we will find new life. Okay, so in other words, this civilization, the empire knew, will be built out of the death of these majestic trees. You, that sometimes known, often are unknown, really shape and mold the, notice capitalized, new world. Adjusting it to, notice capitalized, time and space. Go back to Song of Myself 46. I know I have the best of time and space. It was never measured and never will be measured. I tramp a perpetual journey, come listen all. But notice there, time and space not capitalized. Here capitalized. You, hidden national will, lying in your abysms. Of course, the poetic use for the word abyss. Concealed, but ever alert. You, past and present purposes, tenaciously, I think it's an important word, pursued, may be unconscious of yourselves. You'll remember in passage 46 of Song of Myself, perhaps you've been on it all your life and did not know this idea of the unconscious work that's happening. We obviously have to think of our young when we use this word unconscious. Unswerved by all the passing errors, perturbations of the surface. We're obviously thinking about the war here as he's mentioning it. You vital, universal, deathless germs beneath, and by germs here he means that thing that leads to growth, beneath all creeds, arts, statues, literatures. Obviously we think about the opening lines of Song of Myself, creeds in schools and abeyance. Here, build your home for good. By the way, notice the word here now. Establish here these areas entire, lands of the western shore. We pledge, we dedicate to you. Again, sounding very much like the last lines of the Declaration of Independence. For man of you, your characteristic race. And then we're going to get 7 of these heres. Here. You'll see it over and over. Here may he, hardy, sweet, gigantic, grow. So in other words, no longer are the trees gigantic. Now it's going to be America. Here, tower, proportionate to nature. Notice again capitalized. Here, climb the vast, pure spaces, unconfined, unchecked by wall or roof. It's interesting, unchecked, the only use in the entire the entire leaves of grass here. Here, laugh with storm or sun. Notice again this language of laughing and joy. In other words, the trees are happy to be cut down because the trees know that they are giving rise to the great empire called America. Here, joy. Here, patiently endure. Here, heed himself, unfold himself, not others' formulas heed. In other words, the idea of American exclusivity. Here, fill his time to duly fall, to aid, unwrecked, at last, to disappear, to serve. And there it is. The last time the trees speak in this poem, What is it that they say? We are willing to disappear for the greater good. That is to say, for the rise of the Empire New, for America. Now again, this is going to be deeply troubling to a whole lot of us as readers. No question, let's just say it out loud. But again, we're not going to run from this. We're going to position Whitman in the time in which he's writing this. There's a reason, I think, why there were so many readers of this poem of Whitman's day who were ready to say, you know what, there have to be some sacrifices, and nature must make her sacrifices as well. And even these majestic trees, many of them have to go. And because our consciences are deeply disturbed, a poem like this is going to be somewhat popular. Speaking now about the poem, we'll finish with what Whitman has to say. Thus, on the northern coast, in the echo of teamsters' calls and the clinking chains and the music of choppers' axes, again, it's all choral, right? The falling trunk and limbs, the crash, the muffled shriek. Again, these are compelling words that he's selecting. For those of us that have ever been a part of watching or seeing video of these huge trees falling, we know this word shriek. The groan, such words combined from the Redwood-Tree, as of voices ecstatic, ancient and rustling, the century-lasting, unseen dryads, we're back to it for the last time, singing, withdrawing, all the recesses of forests and mountains, leaving from the Cascade Range to the Wasatch, to the Wasatch, or Idaho far, or Utah. Obviously, these are important mountain ranges of the West. To the deities of the modern, henceforth yielding. The chorus and indications, the vistas of coming humanity, the settlements, features all in the Mendocino woods. I caught. Now, I think it's interesting that at the conclusion of passage 1 of this 3-part poem, that he ends with the word caught. Because I think Whitman feels caught. I think Whitman has a deep concern. Because you'll remember at the conclusion of Shelley's Ode to the